Hey everybody, welcome to CoSN 2021. Today, we're going to be talking about hurdle number one from CoSN's K-12 Driving Innovation Series, which was sponsored in part by CDW. Today, we're going to highlight two innovative programs that are bridging that digital equity gap. If you're watching this live and you just finished Ken Shelton's keynote, thank you for choosing this session. If you're watching this on demand, make sure you do go check out the amazing Ken Shelton in his keynote, of course, only after you're finished watching this session. So let's dive in. First things first, I'm going to throw a minute on the clock. Let's introduce ourselves in the chat, get this moving, get this pumping, your name, your role, your district, and your favorite place to eat pre-pandemic, of course. All right, we have 30 seconds left. If you haven't added anything to the chat yet, you're doing it wrong. Get in there. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you for kicking this off right and sharing today. If you are watching this on demand, sorry that you won't get to see the chat, but just take some time to reflect as we go to the chat each time. Quick intro, my name is Doug Konopelko, and I'm an education strategist at CDWG. As the title suggests, I work as a strategic partner with school districts around the country. If you want to know more, you can read this handy slide. But more importantly, if you want to connect or if you like tweeting pictures of sessions that you're in while you're here at CoSN, you can find me on Twitter at @dkonopelko. I'll also throw it in the chat, and please use the hashtags #CoSN2021 and #CDWGetsEDU if you are posting, so we can keep the conversation moving. I can't get started without saying thank you. Thank you to the district and the school leaders who are here today for pouring your hearts into your work, for pouring your hearts into your students. Thank you to your teachers and the coaches who are sacrificing so much right now to really build that foundation for our students. Thank you to our parents and our community for supporting us in a way that they never thought they would. So thank you just for everything you do each and every day. Back to driving K-12 innovation and hurdle number one, digital equity. So we've all heard about the digital divide, the homework gap. It goes by many names. The list goes on and on. The metaphor we're going to force it to live inside today is that of the bridge. So when we're talking about digital equity and we're talking about gaps in education, we have to take a few steps. So let's take a quick look here. The first step is the need to be able to assess the gap itself. Do we know and understand what gap exists? How can we tell what exists? What are we going to be monitoring? Are we going to be using some sort of metrics or KPIs to monitor our progress as we go through? And then what aspects of the digital divide that we've identified are we going to attempt to bridge as we build out our plan to move forward? Next, we need to understand the foundation that we're building on, right? What do we have in place already that we can build upon as we make this bridge, and what exists within our system today? And then finally, what are the tools and resources we can leverage that are most apt to address our gap while building on that foundation? So what materials are we going to use to build? Right, these are the things we're going to introduce for the sake of whatever our project is to attack digital equity. That's what we need to be talking about. How can we find those key components to move our work forward? These ideas are part of the vision and mission of our organization, or if they're not, they should be. These are the big ideas: digital equity, scaling and sustaining innovation, the evolution of teaching and learning. We all get inundated with the day-to-day work, and it can be really hard to keep our eyes on these, thinking of these sort of as our North Star. We know that we have SIS integrations and ERP transitions and all of those things where we're not getting clean data, and we need to work with our programmers and get everything in place because there's student data in there. We're talking about POs, we're talking about people's paychecks. Those things all absolutely have to be addressed. But when we're making our decisions and we're making strategic plans for our district, again, we have to go back to what are our North Star pieces. I'm going to throw 60 seconds back on the clock. We're going to head back into the chat. Tell me, what projects are you working on that hit on one of these hurdles, accelerators, or tech enablers? 30 seconds. Thanks for being active here. Collaboration and learning is why we come to these conferences. Also, a little reflection. So if you're watching this on demand and you don't have the chat, reflect on what you think of this. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Nailed it. Thanks for continuing this great work. Thanks for continuing the conversation. Don't forget, we're going to have the Q&A after in case you want to dive deep into any of this work. So now we're going to take a closer look at this hurdle, digital equity. There's a lot to dive into when we look at the digital equity hurdle. I'm going to take a couple pieces out of this and focus. So probably number one is that it's more than just the equitable access to technology inside and outside of school. So I think when we think of digital equity, people immediately go to devices and connectivity, but it's so much more than that that goes into what we do in our schools each day. We really also need to focus on the knowledge and the skills to use that technology in the service of learning. I'll repeat that last part so it sinks in the service of learning. It's not enough to show somebody how to create a presentation or throw something together. We've got to connect the dots back to that teaching and learning so that we can drive home the authentic importance of the work we do as teachers, but also that we do as learners. As we're talking about equity, we really need to address equity, making sure that our students' identities are represented in and by the technologies and in the experiences that we're creating with these technologies that we call education. This representation is vital for our students to feel meaningfully connected to that work, and that gives them the opportunities to feel empowered on their learning journeys and as learners. When I think of equity, my mind goes straight to my friend, the incomparable Sharif El-Mekki at the Center for Black Educator Development, on a recent episode of my web series and podcast, Focus on K-12. I know it's shameless self-promotion. Sharif walks through the 4 Ps that you must address when you're talking about equity in our schools, when you're talking about programs that we build out in our schools. While the leaders and teachers here at CoSN are no doubt familiar with the first 3, the policies, professional learning, and pedagogy, it's really that 4th P that we might dive into a little bit more here because it's where we fall short. For pipeline, the focus is on establishing sustainable programs for students to see themselves in their teachers, in their curriculum, in their work, and building out, in the case of the center, a Black teacher pipeline, meaning working with districts to establish programs that provide meaningful opportunities for students to be empowered. There it is, we hear it again, meaningful opportunities to feel empowered. Now, on to the innovative programs you came here to learn about. There are a lot of great examples out there that you could pull from in this very uncommon year that we've just had. But many, while absolutely fantastic, may not go as deep or as wide to drive real change in digital equity. These 2 I'm highlighting today really do. So if you have any more questions about the programs that we talk about, remember, we'll be in the Q&A right after. So we are going to kick it off with Mississippi Connects, which is so much more than devices, although that is definitely a big part of the program. So there are about 450,000 pre-K to 12 students in the state of Mississippi. And just like many places in the country, they do struggle with connectivity. They do struggle with having devices. There are huge variations in not just the connectivity and the devices, but the education that these students are receiving and the resources they have that many of us take for granted. So the Mississippi Department of Education, or MDE, had identified a gap of over 300,000 students who were missing some sort of connectivity that would help them um, be able to bridge that gap between home, school, and their education. When you have a gap that large, and again, first step, really important to identify your gaps, you've got to make sure you have the right partners along the way. So CDW is able to work hand in hand with the Mississippi Department of Ed to help them build out and support the plan that became their equity and distance learning program. In reflecting back to the center's 4Ps, MDE would be working really hard to create the policies that allowed them to begin to address the digital inequity that existed, but would also allow them to get back to those other 4Ps. Because you always need to talk about dollars when dealing with a project this large, and I'm sure there'll be questions on that. I should note the program was funded using the CARES Act. So using equity and educational outcomes as their guides, MDE determined what were their needs going to be, where were their gaps, how are we going to get there. And in a video that was put out by the MDE, their state superintendent of schools, Carrie Wright, she kicked things off by saying, every child, regardless of where they live, has a right to the resources they need to be successful in school. I love that she said resources and not computers, and said resources and not just connectivity, right? We're talking about all kinds of resources here. So as we start to dive a little deeper in here, the final tally for their total need was 390,000 devices, and that included Chromebooks, Windows, and iPads. And I should say just under 300,000 of those were supplied by CDW. So to facilitate this program and ease the load on MDE and the school district's IT department, this program included configuration, break fix support, security, and all the devices were delivered before the new year. But we know in education, the work doesn't stop when the devices get delivered. That's when it begins. So part of this program was a 3-year plan, including project management, comprehensive professional development, security, and an analytics suite that MDE and the districts can leverage to monitor that usage and the efficacy of the program over time. Just so important to keep all of those things at the forefront when we're doing this work. One thing that we know is that once we start that work and get this professional development in place, we start addressing the pedagogy. That's what starts to help us address that 4th P, the pipeline, to create that next generation of empowered learners in our classrooms. Next up for the innovative programs is the School District of Palm Beach County in Florida. This project is focusing specifically on connectivity. Their instructional, operational, ed tech teams have really put a ton of work in place addressing a lot of the 4Ps, but they did identify that their large gap, again, was in that connectivity. Not saying that there's no other work to be done, but for the context of this, wanted to highlight this innovative project. For context, for anybody not familiar with Florida, its counties or its districts, Palm Beach County is roughly twice the size of the state of Rhode Island and has close to 200,000 students. So this is a very large district. To make it happen, the district leaders really worked in partnership with the local government, nonprofits, all different folks. So this is where I would say we could add another P to Sharif's list, which would be partnerships. In a recent article in EdTech magazine, Mark Howard, Palm Beach's chief of performance accountability and the leader on this project and the vision, talked about how much the community wanted to be involved. So they looked for a model where they could all contribute. This is going to be a very brief overview of a very complex and technical project. So let's go to our friend, the Venn diagram, and start layering some circles. We're going to focus on 3 main groups, although others were involved. So we're looking at the county, the school district, and the community. The county and the school district, in partnership with the community, are building out a Wi-Fi mesh network that consists of fiber, antennas, and Wi-Fi range extenders to bring the district network into the homes of more than 25,000 students. So large scope and scale of this project. Um, of course, the final circle here is the funding needed to work on a project like this. While it's still currently being completed, I'm sure you can imagine the amount of time and work that goes into putting something together of this magnitude. This is the main breakdown of the roles. Again, super simplified. The community providing financial support and backing for the county to be able to build out that fiber and the antenna network. And then the district taking it the final mile, or in this case, the final 100 feet or so with those Wi-Fi range extenders, getting that network into the homes, the students that need it, so that they have access to the instruction and education, regardless of the circumstances that they might find themselves in. So those are our two main innovative programs for today, but I want to do a very quick whip around highlight of a few more and then get your input one last time. Three other great examples I've seen to help leap this hurdle of digital equity. Grapevine Colleyville ISD in Texas bought laptop lockers and put them in local stores like Walmart, so parents and students could drop off and pick up their devices from there. Again, an example of meeting students where they are, meeting parents where they are to help bridge that gap. Loudoun County Schools in Virginia provided some Wi-Fi to unexpected places by using a device that I would say is most aptly described as one of those traffic sign trailers with solar panels on it, but equipped to provide connectivity to areas where they found some of their largest gaps. Finally, we've got Minecraft Education Edition, who has been bringing representation and equity into their game, addressing really the deeper equity side of the digital equity work. With working with educators and leaders from around the country, they built out a good trouble world. So thinking back to John Lewis and getting in good trouble, they built out a good trouble world that honors and teaches students about civil rights leaders from around the world, again, from within the game. So meeting people where they are in a medium where you may not expect it. So for our last minute before we go to the Q&A, who else do you know that's doing amazing work to bridge the digital equity gap? Shout them out in the chat. "20 seconds left. We're almost there." Five, four, three, two, one. Thank you so much for participating today. I'll be sticking around for the Q&A and would love to connect with you. Thank you to CoSN for putting together this platform, putting together these resources for us to be able to use and connect. Once again, I'm Doug Konopelko, Education Strategist for CDW, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation.